episode number 240 of the Wholesome Fertility Podcast. My guest today is Katie Beecher. Katie is a licensed professional counselor and medical and emotional intuitive with over 30 years of experience. Katie is featured in over 200 media outlets, including Goop, Kourtney Kardashian's website Poosh, and Miranda Kerr's Cora Organics blog, and has taught a week-long workshop at the Omega Institute. She has a unique way of working with clients, creating a detailed, individualized physical, emotional, and spiritual report and symbolic painting before ever seeing them, talking with them, or even seeing a photograph, using only their name and age. Katie's first book, Heal From Within, An Intuitive Guide to Wellness, uses practical tools and techniques that Katie uses in her own medical and spiritual intuitive readings. The book teaches you how to be your own medical intuitive using Katie's revolutionary step-by-step process for connecting to intuition and spirit, finding self-love and empowerment, as well as how to heal physically, emotionally, and spiritually. Heal From Within is filled with remarkable stories of healing from her years of experience, as well as her own healing from bulimia, Lyme disease, and depression. Welcome to the Wholesome Fertility Podcast. I'm Michelle, a fertility acupuncturist here to provide you with resources on how to create a wholesome approach to your fertility journey. Welcome to the podcast, Katie.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. So I'm so excited to get started. But before we get started, I'd love for you to introduce yourself and also just how you discovered your gifts in life.
Sure. So I'm a medical and spiritual intuitive and a licensed professional counselor. And I've been doing this work for about 30 years. I started off as a counselor, even though I knew that I had all these weird, abilities from the time I was very, very young. I didn't really know what to do with them and didn't recognize them. So even as a therapist, I worked very intuitively, but I didn't know that I had all these medical intuitive gifts. So, but when I was really young, I could always pick up, what people were thinking and feeling. What they were doing, I always was able to tune in, especially to adults. And one of my earliest memories was being 3 years old. And I think my parents had a fight about eggs or something really stupid. And I looked up at them and I thought, you are not equipped to raise me.
Wow.
This is just,
Wow.
Yeah, right. I thought, I am on my own. Great. You got your own stuff here. And I distinctly remember, hearing a voice that told me that. So it was kind of through a series of events, bullying and an eating disorder that led me to realizing that my life was, in a really bad place. I was suicidal because of the eating disorder. I was making myself throw up 3 times a day, and I just couldn't live that way anymore and didn't tell anyone, was really ashamed. So I just came home from school one day and decided to call our pediatrician. I was 16 and tell him what I was doing and ask for help. And I had a car and a job, so I got myself to therapy and fortunately was able to find a therapist who was really accepting and understanding of the weird things that I was telling her about being able to talk to dead people and she helped me connect to my intuition and learn more about my gifts and not fear them and connect to my body and eating disorder as friends instead of enemies. And so those are some of the things that I pass on to other people about healing and trying to look at all the root causes and look at things in a different way rather than feeling like there's something wrong with you or something that you have to fight.
Oh, I love that. You know what? It's so funny. There's no coincidence, but just today I was listening to an audiobook and just kind of like listening. Sometimes you listen to something and then you think to yourself, like, really, we're always at odds with what we don't want in our
Exactly.
body, in our life. And that's and I'm realizing even within myself, like the correct way of doing it, I guess the more flowy way, which is taught in Zen Buddhism and like, all the ancient cultures, is to allow.
Exactly.
And that's when it actually moves through and it doesn't stick around. And like our nature is already like a healing nature. So therefore we don't hold on to the blocks. But would love to get your perspective on that. Like, so is that something that sounds like that's your approach, is really to make friends with whatever is?
It really is. And when I tell people that the eating disorder was one of the best things that ever happened to me, at first they kind of looked at me like, oh my God, that's crazy. And I'm not gonna lie, it was awful. And it was the hardest thing I ever had to do, to recover. But by approaching it as my friend, by asking it what it was doing in my life, what's the purpose for you being here? What are you trying to teach me? How can I be my most authentic self? I was able to recognize that it really needed to be there.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of, there's a little thing that I call the feather in the sledgehammer. And if you get brushed by a feather, meaning, you get a little stomach ache or you're tired or you stub your toe, something like that. And you recognize that and say, oh, okay, I need to get some more rest. I need to slow down. I need to assert myself more, whatever, um, then you don't need to be hit over the head by something like an eating disorder or a serious illness or a car accident or any of those things, to learn to recognize what you need, and make the changes in your life. So again, it's kind of like you said, allowing things to happen instead of ignoring them and pushing them down and fighting them.
Yeah, it's such a more empowering perspective, I feel like.
Definitely. Yeah, absolutely. Because then you can be part of your own healing. Like I talk about it as being a team with what's bothering you instead of working against it.
Absolutely. So you you approach things in such a unique and cool way, and I love it. I think it's so cool that you could pick up on things before even meeting the person. So can you walk us through that? That is like, it's so unique and
Certainly.
it's so cool.
It's a little crazy. Um, yeah, I just knowing someone's name and age, I can tune into everything about them and their life. I create an extensive 4-page report and an intuitive soul painting, which is very symbolic. But the goal is a couple of things. One is to identify and address as many things in people's lives that are impacting them, so positive and negative. And it can be things like, childhood experiences, your relationships, career, life purpose, your intuitive abilities. Are you an empath? Are you sensitive? And of course, your physical and emotional symptoms, but it's really a very holistic approach, again, based on how I healed. If I didn't look at everything, then it wouldn't have worked for me, and it was also about helping people to connect to their intuition so that they can trust themselves. I don't want anyone substituting my intuition for theirs or feeling like in order to heal or learn more about themselves, they have to go through me or anyone else, because the answers are ultimately within ourselves. We need support. We all do. And that's a good thing. But we don't give ourselves enough credit, really. You know what I mean?
I totally know what you mean. I totally know what you mean. I think that we don't realize our own power and our own strengths, and sometimes we even give up too soon. We think we can't make it, or somebody tells us it can't work, so we're like, okay, I guess it can't work. Then hands up, like it's not going to work by myself. But we
Yeah.
know intuitively something within us tells us that, but we're afraid to listen to that because there's no material thing that shows us that it can be done. It's more quiet, this hunch inside.
And it's true, like it happens with medical gaslighting often because you're a little stuck. You need some kind of medical system, often, to get help and testing and things. I'm not a big fan of self-treatment. I think that can do more harm than good sometimes, which is
Mm-hmm.
different from self-care, you know. Um, but you go to someone and you're told there's nothing wrong with you, or your tests are normal, or labeled with something you know that you don't have, you know,
Mm-hmm.
or things like that. And so many of my clients have been through that for years and spent a fortune. And it takes a lot of courage to, fire your doctor or try somebody else, or look at things a different way, or to keep that faith within yourself that, like, something's wrong and you're not getting the answer.
Yeah.
um, you're sick of getting let down, and it's really hard, and it takes courage, and then your family treats you like you're crazy.
Mm-hmm.
So many things. And so it's a really tough system to navigate sometimes without support.
It is. And another thing that came to my mind is convenience. Sometimes it's inconvenient to go and do the legwork or like find somebody else. There's this convenience factor, I think, that we all have gotten used to leaning on.
Yeah, it's true, and even I really do feel bad for people in that situation, because there are a lot of books out there that will direct you to take an herb, or
Mm-hmm.
do a smoothie or do a thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I get the concept, I get the desperation, but it often doesn't work like that, and herbs are not without side effects, and
Right.
so it's I feel bad that people have gotten to a point where they feel like they have to resort to that, you
Mm-hmm.
know. It is hard to find good people to work with that you trust, and fortunately, I have found them.
Mm-hmm.
Which is a lot of why I'm recovered from Lyme and eating disorders and things like that. But it's been hard.
Yeah, for sure. And I think a big part of it is listening to your intuition and finding people that way. I see it with my own patients. I see that, like, I listen to their stories and they tell me sometimes they will not resonate with the practitioner that they've been working with for years, and they decide, something's off. Let me just, like, something clicks and they're like, let me just get a second opinion or a third opinion. And usually they'll do a second and third at the same time, though, because if they're going to do it, they're just going to do it. And now with virtual consultations, it makes it a little easier. So I'll tell you, it's a game changer when you find the right person.
Oh my God. I often think about if I would have been referred to a different therapist, or a different type of therapist, or, some of the, I didn't have to go inpatient, but so many of those are kind of just based on behavioral approaches and control. And that
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't have worked for me, you know? So I was just so fortunate to find the right person right away.
So when you do hear the name and the age, what happens within you? Like, what? Describe it to us, because it's really fascinating.
Certainly, yes. It's very crazy. When people get the report, they're often like, "Oh my God, like, how do you do this? You already know me. Like, this is really crazy," which I never take for granted. I'm very grateful. So yeah, I wish I could actually explain it, but I have a template that I've created, and for the report, and it's divided by the chakras, which are energy centers in the body. For anyone who doesn't know that, and I do that so I make sure that I kind of cover everything, all parts of the person. Um, but I tune in to them. I've learned, like, I don't have to meditate first. I don't have to. I'm just kind of. I can just do it with a first name and an age. I don't even need a last name. Like, I barely even need to look at the name at this point. My guys just know who I'm connecting with, and I start by doing an oracle card to kind of get me into a headspace of, like, thinking about this person instead of what I'm having for dinner, or whatever.
Mhm.
Um, and I just ask for things to come through, um, and I get information. Sometimes I see, sometimes I hear, sometimes I see a word. I'll see a scene, or a picture. I will get a physical feeling. Um, all sorts of things. Sometimes, I smell something, but I do that with all of my senses. And one of the most important things for people doing this type of work, or learning to trust their intuition, is just to allow the information to come through. So the anxiety of it is, what if I listen and make a mistake? Or what if I look dumb because I'm wrong? Or things like that, right? And I've learned just allow whatever you're hearing or seeing, write it down. Um, we go over the reports and the paintings together so that if there's something that's not resonating with my client, I want to know. Sometimes it's symbolic, sometimes it's for a family member, occasionally it'll be for somebody I'm reading next, something like that. So, but like a really good example, and I use this example a lot for anyone who's already heard it, but reading at a 12-year-old girl, and I heard tooth enamel. So my humanness was kind of like, oh, she must have a lot of cavities, but I know better. I just wrote tooth enamel. And her mom was like, that's really crazy because she has extraordinarily strong enamel and has never had a cavity.
Oh, wow.
Right. So it's a good example of just allowing what comes through with your intuition instead of fearing it or judging it, or trying to do too much interpreting. And kind of the meanings will come through the more you work with it.
Isn't that so important for life though? Like we always make meaning. It's kind of like we get what we get and then we make the meaning.
Absolutely. Yeah, because I think we're so hard on ourselves. There's so much judgment and perfectionism and what are people going to think? That kind of stuff. And I think that self-love and self-acceptance are so challenging because of that.
Oh yeah, big time. And I think that it is a conditioned thing as well. I mean, it's definitely something that we see often, and we almost have to work extra hard. I say that with everything. We really have to be proactive about our self love, about our self care, about what we eat, what we do, because if we just go by default, it leads you into some kind of imbalance.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And even, I've been doing this, I'm 58. I've been doing this forever, it feels like. And I still have to be on top of things. And I still have to be like, wow, what is that? Why are you looking in the mirror and seeing the one area of cellulite on your leg instead
Totally.
of look all the things you like about your body, or, you have a pimple or, so I think we all do that. You focus on something you don't like instead of like all the things you do.
Very relatable. Totally.
Right.
And so have you had any stories about fertility, like people trying
Yeah.
to conceive or wanting to connect with spirit babies or anything like that?
Um, Fertility is such an interesting subject because, as I don't have to tell you, there are so many factors,
Yeah.
that come into play. And so many physical things, obviously, but the spiritual and emotional reasons that's a lot of what people don't talk about, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I encounter people who sometimes really want to be pregnant, but they don't realize that they're terrified of repeating the same mistakes that their parents did, you know, of being what they call a bad mom, of not having time for themselves, and then they think they're selfish, and then they feel like crap about themselves, or often it's people who have real issues in their marriage, and they either think that a baby is going to fix them, or they are afraid to kind of accept that maybe the marriage isn't working or the relationship isn't working, and bringing a child into that would not be the optimal situation. There's actually, I have a really, really cool fertility story. I was working with a woman who was in recovery from an eating disorder, and she had been trying for, I guess, around 3 years, and didn't know why she wasn't getting, the whole infertility thing. So I was teaching her how to talk to her body and her intuition, because I felt that if she befriended her uterus and her eggs and her fallopian tubes and all that, that she could, instead of fearing the whole process and having it bring up anxiety, that she could be like, hi, can you help me bring a baby into the world? And, I'm going to approach this differently. So I have a technique where I teach people to do a written dialogue. It's in my book. And she just didn't really grasp the concept. So I said, okay, is there anybody in your life that you feel like you've been able to be authentic with, that you've trusted, that you've felt supported by? And she said, yeah, my grandmother, but she's passed. So I said, okay, we can handle that. So I said, let's do a role play. And I was going to be her grandmother and she was her. And so I said, I'll just kind of show you how to do it. And all of a sudden, I started going into kind of a waking trance and started channeling her grandmother.
Oh, wow.
It was a little crazy because it was before I really got into this work, it was during like regular counseling times. And I was seeing where she played as a child in her grandmother's attic. I was describing everything up there. I knew the doll, her favorite doll. It was a Tender Love doll, my era. I knew all these things and stuff that her grandmother would say to her that nobody else knew or nobody would say to her. And it was pretty mind-blowing for me, but also for her because she felt the presence of her grandmother in the room.
Wow, that's crazy.
It was so crazy. And one of the things it did is it made me realize you really can't push this down anymore. You need to use this in your
Yes.
really important, right? You can't ignore this. So we did that. She talked to her grandmother for a while. It was pretty wild. And then about a month and a half later, she comes back and she said that she was pregnant.
Oh, wow.
And we both really believe, that her grandmother was a big part of that and helped her, not only helped her get pregnant, but also helped her feel the self-love that she needed to be able to accept the child, to feel like she didn't feel ashamed anymore of the eating disorder stuff. She had lived with so much shame and self-deprecation, and it's a pretty cool story.
That's amazing. That's so cool. And how do you walk people through connecting with their own intuition?
Yes, this is one of my very favorite things. It's all in my book too, all the steps. But it's something that I learned when I was 16, and I believe that if I had not been taught this, I would not be here. I definitely wouldn't be healed. I would not be here. So I think about intuition as an all-knowing voice that is accessible to everybody. It's a source of unconditional love and acceptance. It is always there keeping you safe. It's kind of like this spiritual bodyguard or best friend.
Mm-hmm.
And once you're connected with it, you feel more connected with yourself as well. And it's kind of like having this core strength. And so what everybody else is doing is far less important, so you can focus on you get that self-love and stuff you need from you, rather than having to look outward. So
yeah, I like that.
a little bit of background. So the technique is to physically write out a question or statement of your feelings and direct it to your concept of intuition. Like when I started out, it was God. It might be like this person wrote to her grandmother. It could be a tree. It could be whatever it means to you. And so you write it out, and then you just, whatever you hear, see, feel, write that down, then write back to it. Then whatever you get, write that down, write back to it. So you're having a written dialogue, and it could be 5 minutes. It could be 20 minutes. But it's incredibly powerful because you have to stop what you're doing to write, and you're very mindful and you're focused. I really call it a mindfulness meditation because it's a lot harder to get distracted when you just have this piece of paper in front of you and then you're using your body to write. And we get a lot of intuitive signals from our bodies too.
Right. True.
And then I really encourage to write to people to write to their bodies and their symptoms in the exact same way as a friend. So you start that healthy relationship. That's a very quick overview, but
that's really cool.
Yeah.
So if somebody listening to this wants to, should they speak to their womb or specifically to the fertility challenges and ask?
It's whatever calls to them.
Yeah.
So definitely womb, definitely you can speak to your child who's going to be born to you. Um, you can speak to what just came up for me from my guides was if you've lost a child, or if you have had to go, through an abortion or something like that. Um, a lot of people feel so much grief around that and guilt and things. So talk to that child,
Mm-hmm.
have it come into your life and be a friend and a loving being. Um, yeah, you could talk to your fallopian tubes. You could talk to, there's so many reasons, for the infertility or whatever. Um, and you can even say like, how can I help you heal? What do you need from me to help me heal and things. So yeah, it's just I wish I had invented it. I did not. It's a Jungian psychology technique.
Mm-hmm.
But it's definitely something I teach during every reading and I use. That's how I connect to my intuition, my guides.
Well, a couple of things. I actually always, with my patients when we first start, or my clients, I tell them if they've lost to write a letter to the
Yeah.
child. And I've also said write a letter to the spirit child, the spirit baby. Ask questions, really ask for guidance, start the connection, that relationship. Another thing is, I think it was like maybe 6 months ago, I started to do automatic writing, kind of similar to this, pretty much what it is. I mean, so I wrote a question and I just got information. I just started writing. What was crazy about it is that I didn't know what I was writing until I read it. And that's when you know it's a clear
Right.
message. And the information was like, wow, like I couldn't have come up with that.
Exactly. Exactly. It's one thing I love about it is instead of being in control mode, which so many of us are, especially motivated by anxiety, you're letting go and you're allowing
Trusting.
information to come. Yeah, you're trusting. You're saying maybe I don't have all the answers. Maybe I need to kind of get off of my own agenda. Um,
Right.
which is why I encourage people to ask questions like, "Do you have anything to tell me?" Keep it open.
Yes.
Um, instead of things like, why can't I get pregnant, which is a valid question, but it's it's kind of focused on the anxiety mode instead of just, is there something you want me to know?
Right.
I'm open, I'm listening. Because I'm really great at pushing my own agenda and screwing things up. I don't know about you.
All of us, right? It's the human condition. It's a dance. That's what it is. It's a dance. When you dance with somebody, you don't control their movements. You control yours, and then you wait for them to do their thing. And I think that that's what it is realizing that it's a dance, that it's
Yes,
you're part of it, you're part of the equation, but you're not the only part, and there are other aspects that work together.
so much. So, yeah, I think one of the most challenging things in life is to know when to step in and take control and when to step back and
Yeah.
say, okay, what do I need to hear? What do I need to do? And the trick with that is trusting your intuition and spirit enough to know that they will alert you when you need to step in.
Yes. Yeah, I
It's
love that.
yeah, it's because people are like, well, so I just don't do anything and
Right.
just give up. I'm like, no, it's no, you still
Doesn't work
say
like that. Yeah.
it, but you trust that you're going to know when and what you need to do.
Exactly. Exactly. And I love the analogy of the birds, flying up, using their wings to go up, and then at one point letting go when the wind takes
Yeah.
over. So it's kind of really it's effortless effort, Wu Wei we call it, which is it's a Taoist term of effortless effort, and that's really how nature works.
It's
And
true.
that is how we are at our best. That's when the yin and the yang are like in perfect harmony, dancing together. And
Exactly.
they're never perfect actually. They
Right.
ebb and flow and they move. But they work together. So that's kind of like it goes up and down, up and down. It's like this wave, but it works
Definitely.
together to harmonize.
Yeah, no, I love that. I mean, and Jung was so into all that,
Yeah.
so I mean, that's a lot of why I can relate to him. But yeah, no, it's very, very true. And so much of our anxiety is created by trying to control based on fear.
Yeah. And it's interesting because people sometimes go through, when they're in fear, they go through control and then they go through freezing. It's kind of like the two opposite, right?
Yeah. Yeah, because you get overwhelmed and then you feel like everything I do doesn't work. Nothing I do works. I'm not even going to try. There's no point, I can't do it perfectly or all the things. And then you just like, then you disengage and then
Mm-hmm.
you're detached from your body and you can't hear any of the signals. And yeah, I think I know people with eating disorders, especially, can be very black and white, one extreme to the other. So for me, a lot of healing was finding that middle ground.
Yes. And then I was going to actually ask you, so of course, when you're going through any kind of trauma or really strong emotions, it is very hard to find that balance. How does one, because sometimes when you go through those things, it's very hard to pull yourself back.
It
Do you have
is.
any suggestions for that?
Yeah. One is to recognize that, well, so get to know yourself as much as you can. The more we know ourselves, the more we kind of can recognize um, what we do to get in our own way. So being allowing the process of feeling what you're feeling,
Mm-hmm.
um, allow the frustration, allow the whatever, and then look at how you've done things in the past. So be like, okay, I come from this side to, I'll use just dieting or something as an example because whatever. But it's like, okay, so I went from being obsessed, totally obsessed with what I was eating, what I weighed, all the things. And then people think in order to heal, right, they have to go the total opposite way and then just not care at all, not be attached to their bodies, eat everything in sight. Like they think that that's what's going to happen. And it's like, if you know that you have that tendency, recognizing it, being like, okay, I went from one extreme to the other. What does middle look like to me? What, how can I still feel like I am being true to myself, and stay tuned in, um, and catch myself if I start to disengage or start to feel desperate or go off into like crazy anxiety mode. So a lot of it is like allowing yourself to be aware of those uncomfortable feelings,
Mm-hmm.
and accepting them. I think that's the biggest one, is just kind of getting to know your coping strategies and seeing what works and what doesn't, and being open to change and guidance.
Yeah, and it's a good point. I mean, everybody has different coping strategies that they align with. So, like, one person might benefit from taking a walk in nature, and another person might benefit from dancing to music. Everybody has their thing, and kind of remembering that time in your life maybe that felt really good to you and going back to that place, maybe just even remembering a time when you felt balanced.
Yeah, yeah. And also, like you made a good point. I think for me, movement is one of the number one stress relievers, that you can have. And I don't know where I'd be without the amount of movement I do. I'm an avid pole person, pole
Awesome.
dance material and stuff like that. So a little obsessive with it, but that's okay. Um, but if I did not have that activity where I just was like, I'm not home, I'm not dealing with work stuff, I'm not dealing with whatever, and I'm just going to escape into that in a really great, healthy way. Um, Getting out of that, then when I'm done, I can be like, okay, my head's clear now.
Yeah,
Where am I at? Whatever I thought was the end of the world
right.
before I went to class, right? Suddenly it's like, oh, the problem is still there, but it doesn't seem so bad.
Totally. It's funny how I think it is a human tendency to hyper focus and want
Yeah.
to fix. And then
Yeah.
when we do that, we're actually taking ourselves away from our own well balanced center because we're too hyper focused on the problem. And
Yes. Yeah.
that doesn't feel good. It really doesn't feel good. I'm actually listening to the teachings of Abraham, and it is really fascinating. I mean, I've listened to it before, but really listening to it and understanding that we get into this like state of being in our emotions. She said instead of listening to or paying attention to every single thing you're thinking about, just follow your emotions. If your emotions are feeling bad, ask yourself why, but not why based on what's happening outside of you.
Exactly.
Why based on what are you thinking about
And
what's happening it's outside of you.
exactly. And people think, wow, this person can channel this entity, right? She must be this amazing person. And it's all really amazing and cool. What we don't connect with is the fact that we can channel that information too.
Yeah,
You don't have to be a quote medium to talk to the other side, especially to talk to your own loved ones. We all have access to that wisdom. And to me, that's part of quantum physics. It's part of just all being attached to this, universal unconscious force. And so when you start to talk to your intuition, do the writing stuff, you're basically connecting with that same wisdom.
yep.
And so we don't, it's great to reinforce, and get us off on a different way of thinking. And just like when people work with me, like the stuff that I say, it's from my guides and it's all cool and wonderful, but it doesn't mean that you can't access that for yourself too.
Totally. I mean, I see it, it really is, just look at the body, look at the intelligence in a single cell. That same
Right.
intelligence that is pre-programmed into the cell to let it know what it needs to do is also within us as well. It's just how much do you want to, we know we need to sleep, we know we need to wake up, like our intelligence is talking to us at all times. Does
Right.
it just go to the bare minimum, the survival? Yeah, you can if you want, but then you can take it a step further and really get into that wisdom and really connect with your innate intelligence. And that's pretty much what you're doing, activating it within yourself. All of us have that built in. It's just a matter of how much do we really want to get into it.
It's true. When I work with people who are struggling with fertility, their number one fear, and I don't know about you, but often when I work with people, their number one fear is that they're not going to be able to have a baby. And the idea of that is so terrifying that they, in their mind, they cannot let go of thinking about it all the time and working towards it and seeing people and reading about it. And it becomes this huge identity because they're afraid if they let it go, they won't be able to, And one thing I do know, and too, is anxiety certainly does not help fertility.
No.
It's really counterproductive. And coming to an acceptance of like, all right, what if I can't? What if I'm not able to have kids, right? And being open to that, even though it's terrifying, sometimes that opens the channel for you getting pregnant, or you realize, you know what, I have encountered this child who's in foster care, or I really am okay with adopting, or and that becomes an amazing experience. So it's like to face your greatest fear and sit with it and be like, what's the very worst thing that can happen? I've been through difficult things before, and where do I go with this?
Absolutely. And I really encourage the listeners to listen to what you just said with an open mind,
Yeah,
because sometimes people get triggered, or there's like certain words that they're like immediately shut down when they
right.
hear, and it's this thing of the things, or hearing adoption, or those little triggers that say, hey, I don't want to adopt, or whatever
Yep,
response you have, and which is valid.
absolutely.
But it's important to also just feel, what am I feeling in response to that. It's just another empowering thing that you can do, is just watching yourself, realizing, I think this is what it comes down to, is that you have more power than you realize.
You absolutely do. And something I want to say to people, and I think this is really important to hear. Oftentimes, when I work with someone who's having fertility issues, during that process, during that reading, we discovered that there's some underlying health issues. And maybe it's Lyme disease, maybe it's Ehlers-Danlos, maybe it's whatever. but they're things that would impact the health of the baby and the health of the mom, you know? And so it's the infertility that brought you to me or someone else, but that was almost a gift, if you will. Again, keep an open mind, because if it weren't for that, you would not have discovered that you have this underlying health condition or something that you can fix and address and deal with that will make you have a super healthy pregnancy and a healthy child. And, so it's kind of that almost had to happen in order for you to have a healthy pregnancy.
Yeah, and I see this a lot because I've been working with people for many years. And I do see things in hindsight. People are always like, wow, thank God I realized I had the thyroid condition or
Right.
the autoimmune condition that I didn't even know about. And
Exactly.
so those things definitely happen. And ultimately, when you had mentioned in the beginning of the episode that you have this kind of higher awareness and that has your back, it kind of watches over you. I always say awareness, and I tell this to my own family. Awareness has your back. Like if you are aware, that's when you're more protected, when you become aware. And so not to be afraid of awareness.
Right.
Awareness might sometimes bring up uncomfortable sensations and emotions, but you can handle that. Don't be afraid of it because ultimately, in the end of the day, it's what is there to help you.
Exactly. It's like, with back to the eating disorder thing, but if it were not for that, I would not be doing this work. I would not have been able to separate from the really toxic people in my life. I wouldn't have any self-esteem whatsoever. I mean, so many things that happened out of something that almost killed me.
Wow, pretty profound. So for people listening and they want to read your book or even work with you, how do you work with people online?
So people can find me on my website. It's katiebeecher.com. And you can make an appointment from there. Find my book. My book's on Amazon and everywhere else. And I'm on Instagram, Katie Beecher Medical Intuitive, and Facebook and all the things.
So, Katie, thank you so much for coming on. This has been a great conversation. I always love talking about the higher self, really connecting with spirit, connecting with yourself, your own intuition, because I do think that we all have that ability and not all of us use it. Not all of us have really utilized our own potential. So thank you for coming on and sharing your own story and your own journey of healing, and also the insights that you provided for the audience.
It was my absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So that concludes today's episode. You can find all of the links mentioned on the episode notes. If you're enjoying these episodes, please take a moment to share and leave a review. Reviews mean everything to podcasters, and I really enjoy hearing from my listeners. You can also find me on my website at www.thewholesomelotus.com or email me at info@thewholesomelotus.com. I love hearing from my listeners. If you're interested and want updates as well as a free ebook on my top 10 fertility boosting habits, you can visit my fertility page on www.thewholesomelotus.com. I thank you so much for listening in and hope that you have a beautiful day.